Hello there, just wanted to make a quick follow-up video to the one I made a week or two back. This is about colloidal silver, COVID-19 and HIV-1, where I pointed out the extraordinary discovery of 4 HIV-1 inserts into the original coronavirus family to create what we call the new coronavirus or the novel coronavirus, also called COVID-19. Now, this led me to look a little bit more deeply into the subject of HIV and AIDS and its origins, which all started actually, I guess, with a simple Google search. Here we go, where did AIDS come from? And very quickly you'll find very similar stories to the ones that we have been hearing recently about coronavirus and COVID-19 during this outbreak, and I'm referring to similar sort of suspicious narratives such as this one that go something like, where did AIDS come from? Scientists have traced the origin of HIV back to chimpanzees and SIV and HIV-like virus that attacks the immune system of monkeys and apes. Researchers identified a strain of chimpanzee SIV but called SIV, which was nearly identical to HIV. And it's like, hold on, where have we heard all this before? This, of course, is like the original narrative that was connected to AIDS that has been rehashed and respun to include now snakes and bats, and very clearly appears to be, virtually like for like to the stories we're being told about coronavirus. So this immediately makes me very suspicious that AIDS was not a naturally developing thing that just suddenly struck a monkey one day, much like coronavirus didn't suddenly strike a bat. The truth is, of course, here that monkeys and apes, chimpanzees, have been around for millions of years and they've been fine. Perhaps it's only when a laboratory worker injects them with a specifically nasty virus that they suddenly come down with it. And it seems a bit strange that monkeys should suddenly develop a sexually transmitted disease that kills them out of nowhere. And this, of course, also applies to the story we've been told recently about coronavirus, which then leads us to look a little bit more deeply into the subject of Big Pharma and the business of HIV and AIDS, because it seems very clear that these wheels here are not to signify money going around, but they may as well be, because antiretrovirals have been a lucrative product for the world's biggest drugs companies. And the clue should be right there in that line as to what's going on with what's behind this outbreak that we've heard so much about recently, and who might be behind it. Because when we look a little bit, this is 10 years old now, printed in 2010, and if we read in the first line, there's another big clue. The cost of treating HIV with antiretrovirals has plummeted during the past decade. Prices for the 6 most common initial treatments, blah blah blah. The declines are down to a variety of factors, including the production of generic cheap copies of expensive drugs. Basically, this means that their profits are also possibly sliding slightly. Although, if we look on down here, they still seem to be going up. This is it becomes clear that HIV remains big business for Big Pharma. HIV antiretroviral sales across the 7 major markets, including the UK, total 11.8 billion. That's up 4 billion on the previous year. And that's a colossal amount of money, and you can just begin to imagine here what they might be thinking as far as boosting profits and expanding their customer base. And of course, what would that entail? Quite clearly that could involve turning a sexually transmitted form of HIV into an airborne version. Very clearly, if they could make HIV airborne, then this business then would potentially create 100 times, 1,000 times more profit than it is at the moment, as they literally turn every citizen of the earth into a customer. And it's the turning people into customers bit that I would also like to address briefly, because I believe there is a very strong ethos, of course, that these drug companies follow, which is basically preventative medicine kills return business. And they're only, of course, too well aware of this fact. And have therefore designed HIV, I believe, to be a persistent illness that will stay with the patient until they die. There may be cures for it, but they're very careful to keep the cures well hidden, or at least just for themselves, and then manage the symptoms of all the patients and all the people suffering on their knees, begging to give away their money. And of course, they're only too willing to take their money and manage their symptoms until the patient dies, which is, of course, one of the most lucrative businesses on earth. And this quite potentially now has been expanded, as I say, just by making HIV airborne instead of just a sexually transmitted disease. And the evidence of this is drug company pitching and touting can be found from our politicians recently, which I think is extremely worrying because they don't seem to even realise they're doing it. If we just look back on the last couple of days of announcements on the BBC, we'll find references to HIV and pharmaceuticals in terms of treating this airborne AIDS that we're not being told about. And very clearly, as I say, yes, touting on behalf of big pharma drug cartels, as we shall see here.
Already licensed for some other use or indication. An example would be hydroxychloroquine, which is a malaria drug. Another example in our clinical trials would be a combination of lopinavir and ritonavir, which is an HIV treatment.
Lopinavir and ritonavir, which is an HIV treatment. I mean, why on earth would he be suddenly going on about HIV treatments in the middle of a coronavirus announcement? Does seem a little bit peculiar. And then the very next day, we hear it again. This is just 6 minutes into the government's talk.
That is why, as the Health Secretary explained, clinical trials are now taking place to see if antivirals, which have helped in the fight against HIV, and anti-malarial medicine.
Antivirals that have helped in the fight against HIV, which we've been trying since the 80s, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, we've been testing these drugs to make sure that they don't cure any symptoms and they just manage symptoms since the 80s. This is a well-honed business, which these people have clearly been conspiring and planning for the best part of 40 years at least. And the evidence here is all over our politicians who are coming out literally doing the pitching on behalf of these big pharma drug cartels. Now the worrying thing is that they don't seem to realise that they're doing it. They think they're helping. They don't even have a clue what they're doing, who they're working on behalf of, or the fact that they could be, putting lives in danger with this. And of course there's the irony, they're putting all our lives in danger with this terrible exploitation. Where it just says save lives here on the free, it's all a complete fraud, of course. And we have to look at this a little bit more carefully. Now, of course, Big Pharma has a long, proud tradition of working together with banks to meet the definition of terrorism. And I've clearly been working in league with big banks to terrorise us and work on the strategy of this terrorism for many, many years now. Common threads persist throughout definitions of terrorism: violence, injury or death, intimidation, intentionality, multiple targets. I mean, where have we heard that? And political motivation. Well, here we go. I mean, we've all just seen it, haven't we, ladies and gentlemen? Literally every single, this is again like the AIDS thing. It's just a rehashed strategy that's still being touted as something original. And this brings us to another discovery I've made. This is about vaccines and the fact that they are also a hoax and will only work on a limited number of people at best. And this is a US virologist who is trying to raise the alarm over this virus, but doesn't seem to be aware of the HIV insertions into the coronavirus. Nevertheless, you can hear from his sound bites that there is something
healthy enough to leave. What I find alarming is we are releasing all these patients, telling them they are virus-free.
What he finds alarming is that they're releasing patients telling them they're virus-free. In other words, he's saying that we are now aware that this virus doesn't go away. It's a little bit like herpes. People can keep relapsing, keep reinfecting people. And he goes on to say,
and they go back to the community. It's not your average SARS, it's not your average MERS.
It's not your average SARS and it's not your average MERS. Now, and it's not your average